True.
So, of course, there's a lot of resistance. I can see that.
Yeah, oh, we're not over the Iraq war yet. We still
Oh,
look at the
really?
Middle East through the Iraq war lens.
Uh-huh.
Right.
It's,
And now
Every-
and now you're reminded of what happened in Beirut a few years ago.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
And, on this, honestly, I mean, in the conversation about Gaza, every time you say the U.S. has to play a role if you want to build a coalition for the day after, everyone says, remember Beirut?
So how is, if I can just ask you that, how is the mood about that? In the present administration, and of course, whoever comes next, is there such a you'd say it's isolationist, and I reckon it's more on the Republican side and on the Democratic side.
Both.
Both.
I mean,
Both.
The
Okay.
idea
So-
of an American military role,
Mhm.
and even if we're talking about, not boots on the ground, just
Right.
intelligence,
Right.
just there will be huge resistance from the Republicans, but also from Democrats. No one wants to be seen as, getting America into another war.
No.
But this is going to be a big challenge actually this weekend if the Israelis, when the Israelis hit Iran,
Yeah.
what the U.S. Will do.
Yes.
That's going to be a huge test.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Well, there's a lot of hope in Israel for an active U.S.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure the U.S. Will be as active. I mean, the U.S., and I have my own view, mistakenly, is pushing Israel to minimize the response
Mm-hmm.
in order for the U.S. not to have to do anything.
Right.
But understanding that, to my mind, April was a mistake. The lesson
Yeah.
that Iran learned from April is send rockets to Israel, and you'll get a tiny little, slap on the wrist.
Right.
And you don't want to. And part of that is the U.S. The U.S. just doesn't want to be in a situation. My view here again, we see any military action as almost immediately creating World War III.
Yeah.
Right. But let me try a thought on you. We talked about that, me and Ricky, just before. If the Israelis do nothing now, if they just take this and push for some kind of deal that pushes Hezbollah back north of the Litani River, it's a possibility. I mean, it could happen. Maybe not with Netanyahu, but just play with the thought. You think that would be a move that might work? Providing the U.S., of course, and maybe some other actors really push for that. That they take this. Nothing really happened. Nothing bad did happen. The Iranians failed. So let's go for a kind of a solution that gives Israel that security down south, pushes the Hezbollah back north of the Litani River. Would that be an option?
I mean, it's an option, as you say.
Yeah.
You hear many Israelis say it.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Personally, I think it would be a mistake. I think it will be used by Hezbollah and Iran and Hamas to say, look, we won.
Yeah,
Look, they were too
exactly.
afraid.
Yeah.
Look,
Of course.
etc. I think, in America, we look at it from a very technical point of view. But if you look at it politically and strategically, this maintains basically the message will be Israel and the U.S. were deterred.
Right. Yeah.
So it re-established
okay.
psychological deterrence.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, this is certainly what you hear from many Israelis and what you hear from many Americans, and it's understandable because, we all know military action never goes as planned. It's never a clear linear thing, and things can and do go wrong. But I believe that would be a major strategic mistake. Will only bring us, get us ready for the next round, which will be even worse.
Yeah.
That's my view.
That's very interesting because it really points to a thing that I think pops up very often here in Europe. Exactly that inability, if I may use that word, to understand the reasoning in Tehran and in Beirut. We tend to see it as they would think the way we do. And they not necessarily do that.
I think you should add the reasoning in Israel too.
Welcome back to another episode of the Middle East Podcast that today will focus on the Palestinians. And to discuss that, we have an excellent guest, Ghaith al-Omari from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He is a former executive director of the American Task Force on Palestine, and he served as an advisor to the negotiating team during the 1999-2001 permanent status talk, in addition to holding various other positions within the Palestinian Authority. So obviously, he is the man to talk to. Welcome back to the Middle East Podcast, Ghaith.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be with you guys again.
Great. So Ricky, why don't you get us rolling?
Right. So, Ghaith, the following voice or image is rarely reported in Swedish media. Let us imagine a regular middle-aged Palestinian living and working in Ramallah, living in an area where the violence against Palestinians has increased a lot, both from Israeli settlers and Israeli soldiers, and living a few hours away from two ongoing wars. So my question is, what do you think? How does he think about the future? What is there to hope for a person living in that kind of situation?
First of all, thank you for pointing this out. I mean, I want to mention that as we focus on Gaza, things in the West Bank are bad. As you said, the casualty level is very similar to the days of the Intifada, etc. But look, I mean, for the Palestinian that you described, they are struggling between two different impulses. One impulse is exactly what you said: hopelessness, anger. I would add to this, the economic situation is extremely bad. So many Palestinian laborers who used to work in Israel don't work there anymore. The Palestinian Authority can't really pay salaries, and on and on. So there's despair, there is anger. This is always a fertile ground for radicalization, for recruitment by all of that. And I would also add that Hamas, Iranian media is also sending very strong messages about radicalization. So that's kind of one impulse. But the other impulse is the exact opposite. And then look at what's happening in Gaza. Many people, especially the older generation, remember the not only uselessness and futility, but the destruction that came with the second Intifada and with violence, and they don't want to expose themselves to that kind of a scenario. And so what you see is this kind of very interesting situation. You look at the polls, you see a very high support for the Hamas, for violence, for armed resistance. At the same time, the reality on the ground in the West Bank, we have not seen third Intifada, mass unrest, etc. But it's a very volatile situation. This is a very delicate balance that could flip at any time. And I would add just one last point here, which is this is all happening in the context where there is no political leadership that has the credibility, moral standing, political standing to guide the public. So it's very fragile, but so far, the balance between these two contradictory impulses is creating a measure of stability.
Right. Let me expand on that. If this person, if we take a broader view here, is there a sense as well, as what you mentioned, that they have really been abandoned by their Arab brothers and sisters in the surrounding countries? The very fact that there hasn't been that kind of uproar, if you like, as I think many were expected after the war in Gaza started. Is there a sense sort of being alone in the world, if you get my drift?
Again, it's a very complicated one. If we talked about this on October 6th last year, then I would say absolutely. Palestinians would look at the Abraham Accords, they would look at the Saudi-Israeli talks, and they will say, people have forgotten about us. Now you have something different. Now there is no doubt to many Palestinians that the Palestinian issue is back in center stage. I can go on with all of the indicators. The Saudi-Israeli talks are going nowhere. Suddenly, all Arab foreign ministers and even the Saudi crown prince are talking about Palestine and all of that kind. So there's a sense that you're back in the agenda. Yet also there's a sense that the Arabs, and frankly the whole world, has been useless. The war in Gaza continues. The tragic human toll goes on. And so while they feel that they're at the center, they certainly feel that the world and the Arab world is useless. And you see different responses to this. You see, on the one hand, increased support for those who basically just make a lot of noise. If you look at polling again, who are the most popular? People like Erdogan, even people like
Right.
Gordon, and the late and unmourned Nasrallah, even though they have not really done much to help the Palestinians. And who are low on the polls are actually the countries who are helping the Palestinians in Gaza: UAE, Jordan, etc., who are sending humanitarian aid, etc. So there is a sense of resentment, a sense of betrayal, for sure.
Mhm. I think, Ghaith, is it a possibility to talk a little bit slower? I think that would be great. I appreciate that.
I had too much coffee, sorry.
Okay.
Can one have too much coffee? I wonder.
Obviously, yes.
So anyway, let's move the view up a little bit. Some people say that the only possible future for the Palestinians in the West Bank would be a federation with Jordan, which can be seen as a natural solution since most of the people in that country are Palestinians. And since once upon a time, the two were one entity called Transjordan. So how do you look at that? Is that at all a possibility?
The main problem with this idea is the following. The Jordanians don't want it. The Palestinians don't want it. The Israeli security and military establishment doesn't want it because they look at Jordan under its current configuration as a key strategic asset, an anchor to stability. And the US doesn't want it because Jordan plays a very important role in the security strategic architecture of the region. But, joking aside, look, I think all of these clever ideas and clever between quotes are ways of avoiding dealing with the real problem. The real issue is that the Palestinians want a state on Palestinian territory. That is the core of the Palestinian national identity. They will not be content with, these things. This, frankly, reminds me of, I would say, the anti-Semitic idea that, the Jews should have taken Uganda or the Jews should have taken Argentina. The Palestinians are a people with a connection to the Palestinian land in the same way that the Jews are a people with a connection to that land. If we don't address this, it will go nowhere. And I repeat, from a geostrategic point of view, Jordan is the last remaining stable country in the Levant. Anything that will undermine the stability of that country will be geostrategically bad for everyone, for the Arabs, for the Israelis, for the West. And so let's put aside these ideas and focus really on how do we deal with the core of the problem.
That was one of the most powerful arguments I've ever heard about that, shooting down that idea. Thank you. But let me expand on something you mentioned before here. According to polls, most Palestinians really would like to get rid of your present President Mahmoud Abbas, who have several times promised elections, but nothing has happened really. So my question is really, why do you think, and he's a pretty viewed as a pretty corrupt leader, and why is there no, popular movement? I wouldn't say uprising, but popular movement to really try to get rid of Abbas? Is there, for the lack of other candidates? So why do you think, since he's so unpopular, why isn't more happening, sort of?
Again, it's a very complicated question because there are many factors at play here. One factor is if you're a Palestinian. Okay, let me take it a step back. I mean, I want to compare it to the Arab Spring. If you're a Tunisian back in 2011 and you're angry, there's an obvious address to your anger. You go against Ben Ali and you topple him and you have something else. In the Palestinian case, it's more complicated. If you're a Palestinian, say, living in Ramallah today, and you want to take out and go in a demonstration against Abbas, you ask yourself, when I do this, am I helping the Israelis who want to collapse? At least this government seems like it wants to collapse the Palestinian Authority. Am I a traitor? So you wonder.
Right.
And then you ask yourself, if I go out, do I support Hamas? Because remember, the Palestinian political system is divided. So you have all of these kind of considerations. So that's one. Two, and it goes back to the previous question, or two questions ago, which is right now, I think the Palestinians are in the West Bank are very worried of a collapse in the security situation. And there is real concern. If I take to the streets and the Palestinian Authority collapses, what do I have? Do I have chaos like we had in the Second Intifada? Do we have a war with the Israelis like we have in Gaza? So these are all things that keep things back. But all of that said, I could have said something very similar about Mubarak just a month before he was toppled.
Yeah.
These are very, when you have so many weak, fragile structures, when you have so much volatility, things continue working until they stop working. And I think, these are all factors that work right now, but it doesn't mean we have real stability. It means that things are going well right now, but they could collapse any moment.
Okay. So we'll stay there. President Abbas will be 90 next year. So looking at the Palestinian political scene, who are the possible successors? And do you think any of them has the will and the courage to call for a future election?
Look, there are two ways of looking at this question. One way is the way you framed it. And I can look at names. Yes, we're actually seeing some Palestinian political voices doing just that. The former Palestinian foreign minister, Nasser Kidwa, who was recently expelled from the Fatah party, has recently come out and said, we need elections to create a new leadership. Another leader, Mohammed Dahlan, sitting in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, has been publicly saying the same. A lot of activists have been saying the same, particularly after the cancellation of the last promised elections. Privately, you talk to a lot of those guys, the seniors in Fatah, and they all realize the nature of the problem, and they all want to see a change. But they just don't have the tools. I don't say it's a question of courage. I think it's a question of tools. And unfortunately, what Abbas has done is he ensured that none of these political actors have the ability to establish and create a strong constituency. In Palestinian politics, and this is very different from democratic countries, traditionally in Palestinian politics, real politics was played within the Fatah movement or within Hamas. So it's not electoral politics, it's party politics. And in the past, Fatah used to be very vibrant. Many different views, leaders. You remember when Abu Arafat died, it took 2 hours to find successor because you had strong people. Right now, Abbas makes sure that every time someone becomes popular, he cuts them down. That's what happened with Dahlan. That's what happened with Kidwa. That's even what's happening, with the most famous Fatah person, Marwan Barghouti, and his people. So they realize that they don't have the political tools to do this. Now, from the outside, we're too afraid of instability. We believe that if we start pushing Abbas, we might crumble this whole structures. So we're not pushing that. In the short term, this is working. Abbas is there, 90 is young, may he live many years. Yet, when eventually he leaves the scene, we will end up with a vacuum. It's not a lack of talented individuals. It's a lack of a process. It's a lack of a political structure that can stabilize and bring leaders up to the scene. And I believe personally, the first step that we need to do is to start pushing Abbas to create stability again in the Fatah scene. I mean, maybe to put it some perspective. Abbas is a product, his political growth happened between Damascus in the early 1970s, the Soviet Union in the late 70s, early 80s, and Tunisia. He is someone who has turned Fatah into something similar to the Syrian Ba'ath Party, to the Soviet Communist Party, where he doesn't do politics. It's all about loyalty. It's all about, palace politics. And unless we change this, then this is one of the reasons why the fragility of the current system is with us. We need something more deep than basically saying, get Abbas to appoint someone else.
Because, I mean, if I just can take on to this, he will die. I mean, 90 is not young, but it's not that young. So then, but, when the vacuum does happen, is there enough people, you think, that can act so you can avoid this potential chaos that you mentioned, you think?
I mean, look, if I were to bet, I would
Right.
say that the old people in Fatah will get together and
Right.
choose someone among them.
Mhm.
If I were to guess, it will be the oldest, sickest, least capable, so that you can have someone who is a figurehead that
Right.
they can work behind.
Okay.
I believe this because this is how institutions always gravitate towards
Mhm.
self-preservation.
Right.
But we will have the problem. First of all, this is not guaranteed. And today you have many people who will say, "Why should I accept this?
Right.
I am as strong, as capable as this guy. Why should I accept it?" Another problem. Many of these people, frankly, have following, and some of them even have guns. A protracted process might create growing instability. But there's another problem. Look, and I go back to when Arafat died and Abbas became president. When that happened, quickly we had three tools of legitimizing Abbas's rule. The Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, which was still popular at that time, immediately endorsed him. Fatah, which was still seen as, the center of gravity of Palestinian politics, endorsed him. And the Palestinian Authority, which at that point was credible, ran an election and he won. We call these legitimizing tools. Today, these three institutions lack the legitimacy. And I'm not sure,
Right.
even if you have a new president, that this guy, and unfortunately, they're all guys, will have the ability to govern, will have the standing, the stability, the legitimacy to govern. So we have a problem with the choice of the leader, but then we will have a problem of how does this leader actually exercise power in a stable way.
Right. Do you think this has changed since October 7 last year? And to tag on to that question, has it changed the Palestinian diaspora? The people outside the Palestinian areas,
which
It-
you are
it's last year.
which you are part of,
yeah,
right?
which you're part of
Yeah.
since
I mean,
last
look,
year.
has it changed in general? Yes, it has, but to the worse. Today, Hamas is more popular.
Right.
I don't think it's going to, by the way, footnote here, I don't think it's going to remain popular after the war, but today it's
No.
popular.
Right.
And the Palestinian Authority is less popular. I mean, to me, it's very telling that the Palestinian Authority has been absent in the last year. It has been absent. Who is leading the diplomacy? It's the Arabs. It's not the Palestinians. You don't see them.
No.
In the diaspora, it's a deeper, longer problem. And again, one has to look historically. The PLO was traditionally a diaspora-based organization. So it invested a lot in keeping the diaspora on board. These institutions, the PLO institutions, which were mainly diaspora, were strong. A lot of resources, time, political capital was spent on the diaspora. Since the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, the diaspora has become, a secondary matter. So the Palestinian leadership stopped paying attention to the diaspora. So even before October 7th, the diaspora and the Palestinian leadership have parted way. After October 7th, this even increased. Now, unfortunately, the diaspora, like many diasporas, this is not only a Palestinian phenomenon, diasporas tend to be more hardline. If you're sitting in Washington, D.C., you will take a very hard line position because what do you care? At the end of the day, you will go home to your comfortable, safe home. And so you started to see in the diaspora even more hardline positions. People no longer talk about the Palestinian state. They talk about a one-state solution.
Right.
Disturbing support for violence, disturbing support for Hamas. You see it in many of those demonstrations we see on campuses here in Washington, and I suspect also in Europe. People raising Hamas flags, people raising Hezbollah flags. So this is a deep problem. That's a problem for the Palestinian national movement, but also a problem